Welcome back to DIY My Way. I've had my Titan BX42 Wood Chipper for about 3 years now, and I put an awful lot of limbs through it. So I think I'm in a pretty good position to give you a good, fair review of it and whether it's worth the money. In this video, I'll tell you how it came packaged and how I set it up, as well as how well it works in the field. First, let's cover the specs of the BX42 Wood Chipper. As of the making of this video, the price on the Titan Attachments website is $1,834.99 with free shipping. But Titan also sells it on Amazon for $1,849.99, also with free shipping. So it's slightly more on Amazon, but if you already have an Amazon account, it may be worth it not to have to set up an account with Titan. I have several Titan implements, and I have found that the prices do vary between Amazon and Titan Direct. Sometimes it's a better deal on Amazon, and sometimes it's a better deal directly from Titan, so check both. I have links to both in the video description, along with a link to the manual, which I recommend you read if you're considering buying the chipper. The chipper can handle timber up to 4 inches in diameter, which is plenty big for my needs. The rotor is 25 inches in diameter, is a ½ inch thick, weighs 75 pounds, and has reversible hardened steel blades, so you can just flip the blades for a fresh sharp edge before having to sharpen them. By the way, Titan sells replacement blades, and I have a link to them in the video description. The rotor paddles have twig breaker notches, and Titan claims that it eliminates clogging. But I can tell you it will still clog from time to time, as most chippers will. It has a hinged fold-up feed hopper for transportation and storage, and the discharge chute is also adjustable for direction and throw distance. It also includes a PTO shaft, and the chipper is rated for tractors up to 40 horsepower. They don't specify a minimum horsepower, but I've seen subcompact tractors operate this chipper just fine in other videos. If I had to guess, it needs a minimum of about 17 horsepower at the PTO shaft. The operating PTO RPM is between 540 and 1000 RPM. Finally, it weighs in at 431 pounds. One thing to note is that it does not say that it is quick hitch compatible. However, the bottom pin distance of 26¼ inches is within quick hitch specs. Also, there are 2 holes for the top link pin, and the height from the bottom pins to the top link pin in the upper hole is 15 inches, which is within quick hitch range, so I think it would work. If you have a quick hitch, you should verify the dimensions will work with your quick hitch, since quick hitch dimensions vary somewhat between manufacturers. I started shooting this video on my phone after getting the chipper off the delivery truck. The wood chipper comes strapped to a pallet in a protective metal frame, which by the way I later turned into a welding bench, so keep that frame. It could come in handy. It's delivered by a freight carrier that likely won't have a lift gate on the truck, so have your pallet forks on your tractor at delivery time. The feed hopper, discharge hood, and PTO shaft were bubble wrapped, which was good to see. I didn't video the assembly when I got it, but it's very straightforward and easy. Having a second person help attach the discharge hood is nice, but I managed it myself with no problem. I store my wood chipper on a dolly in my shop, so hooking up my tractor is easy, especially with my Pat's Easy Chain system. I attached the PTO shaft after greasing the universal joints. As I mentioned in the specs, the feed hopper folds down from the storage position. There's even a storage spot for the latch arm. On the bottom are 2 bolts that are secured with washers and nylock nuts. You'll need a 17mm wrench to tighten them. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I don't actually put those nuts on to hold it, because this thing is so heavy. I find that this thing doesn't go anywhere, so it sits on its own weight just fine, so I don't see the need for the bolts, but if you want to use them, by all means use them. One of the reasons I chose the BX42 over other wood chippers is the clamshell design that allows easy access to the rotor and blades for inspection, maintenance, and clearing clogs. A single 18mm bolt is all I have to remove to access the innards. I keep an 18mm wrench in my tractor toolbox in case I need to clear a clog in the field. As I mentioned earlier, each blade has two cutting edges. The bolt pattern is such that it only allows you to flip the blade in the correct direction for the cutting edges. You cannot flip them the wrong way, which is great. You'd be very disappointed in the performance of the wood chipper if you could flip them the wrong way. This is the stationary blade. Approach it with caution because it is sharp on all sides. This is good because that means it has 4 available cutting edges, so you can flip it every which way to use all 4 edges before having to sharpen them. The feed chute has 2 heavy flaps to discourage pieces of wood from flying back at you, but this doesn't always work, as you'll see later in the video. As a general rule, you don't want your hands to go past the flaps while feeding limbs into the chipper. Taking a peek under the flaps, you can see where the sausage is made. The rotor blade shears limbs against the stationary blade, and the chips pass behind the rotor blades to the other side of the rotor, where the paddles sling them out of the discharge hood. This is the twig breaker that chops small sticks and such into pieces too small to clog the discharge hood. In theory, anyway. Like I said, it doesn't always work. One critical safety check is to make sure there's no front-to-back play on the rotor shaft that might allow the rotor blades to strike the stationary blade, which would result in chaos, death, and destruction. If you find there's any movement, loosen the set screws on the rear bearing sleeve. Pull the rotor toward you. Then push the sleeve flush with the bearing and tighten the set screws to 18 foot-pounds. A little Loctite will help keep the screws tight. Also make sure the set screw on the front bearing sleeves are torqued to spec. Then recheck the gap between the rotor blades and the stationary blade. Check for rotor shaft slop before each use. When preparing to use the chipper for the first time, the most important step is to make sure the gap between the rotor blades and the fixed blade is set correctly. The gap can vary slightly from one rotor blade to the next, so spin the rotor slowly to see if there is one that looks closer than the others. This is the one I'll use to set the gap for them all. The manual recommends a gap of 1/32 inch for maximum efficiency. That's just over 30,000ths of an inch, which is a little too close for comfort for me in case the shaft develops some front-to-back slop. So I set the gap at 1/16 inch. The chipper still performs very well, and I have a little peace of mind. To set the gap, I have found that a spark plug gap gauge works well. It so happens that 60 thousandths is very close to 1/16 inch, so that's what I'm using. I position the rotor blade so that its cutting edge is across from the stationary blade edge, and then slide the gauge from the top to the bottom to see if it binds or has any play along the way. From the outside, I can see the tip of the gauge in the gap to make sure it's in the right place. Once the stationary blade gap is set to what I want it, I torque the bolts tight. The manual says to torque them to specified values according to the chart in the back of the manual, but they don't tell you what the size of the bolts are. So I had to do a little Googling to find out that a 13mm bolt head goes with an M8 bolt. The proper torque for a Class 8.8 M8 bolt is 18 foot-pounds. By the way, I had to clip the washers with a rotary grinder and a cutoff wheel so that the bolts could move in far enough and the washers could sit flat without lapping up on the weld. Here's a summary of the bolt torques. All bolts are Class 8.8, which determines the recommended torque. The rotary and stationary blades require a 13mm wrench socket, or size 8M, with a recommended torque of 18 foot-pounds. The bearing bolts require a 21mm wrench or socket, or size M14, with a recommended torque of 103 pounds. The bearing sleeve set screws require a 4mm Allen wrench, or size M8, with a recommended torque of 18 foot-pounds. Note that there are 2 set screws on each sleeve. I also have this info in the video description for your convenience. Be sure to check the torques on the bolts and set screws before first use. Surprisingly, the manual doesn't give an interval for rechecking torques in the maintenance section, but they do say to torque them after the first hour and at the 10th hour, so I do it every 10 hours of operation to be safe. Also, before each use, give the front and rear bearings several squirts of fresh grease. So how does this chipper perform in the field? You're about to find out. Let's go back in time to 2018 when I was clearing the site for my shop. Notice that I have the chipper off the ground. Most chippers can sit right on the ground and that's fine, but I prefer it a little higher. Also, I like to lean it back toward the tractor a bit as insurance against the rotor shaft developing some slop. With it leaning forward, the rotor blades are not likely to strike the stationary blade if slop develops. The first piece happens to be about 3 inches in diameter. That didn't take long at all. By the way, it's best to stand to the side of the feed hopper when feeding wood into the chipper. You'll see why shortly. Also, I wear safety glasses as a minimum and sometimes a forest helmet as a maximum. Limbs with a lot of branches sometimes need a little encouragement. As you can see, swinging the discharge hood is very simple to do. Another decent-sized limb quickly converted to mulch. This is why you should always wear eye protection. A limb can sometimes decide to slap you upside the head like this. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, that's all well and good, but can it handle bamboo? Yes, it can. Because bamboo is light, it doesn't gravity feed as well as heavier woods. Here's a first-person view of feeding the chipper so you can see how it chips up wood. It can handle freshly cut green wood with leaves just as well as dried up wood. And this is why you should stand to one side of the feed hoppers. Some limbs are more disagreeable than others about being reduced to wood chips. Overall, I've been very pleased with the Titan BX42 Wood Chipper. I certainly wouldn't call it professional grade, but for someone like me who will use it several times a year, I consider it a good buy. I'm about to use this chipper again to chip up the brush in the trees that I pushed down during the piranha tooth bar trials, and you'll see that in an upcoming video. So if you've been considering the Titan BX42 Wood Chipper, then I hope this video has helped you decide whether it's right for you. If it has been helpful, then please click that like button, leave a comment, and by all means, please subscribe. And if you want to know when I post new videos, click that little bell. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.